The stars seemed far colder than they had any right to be. Commander Valeria Klein, eyes fixed on the void beyond the viewport, felt the weight of the silence pressing in around her. It wasn't a silence of peace, but one of expectation. The hum of the Ember's wrath, the flagship of humanity's resistance, was like a heartbeat in the deep, endless dark. It was steady, rhythmic, and yet, as Valeria stood at the bridge, she could feel a rising tension that matched the pulse of the ship. There had been no human voice from Earth in centuries. The last transmission, if it could even be called that, had been nothing but static. The loss of Earth was a wound that would never fully heal. The planet had been ground to dust by the Galacrians, who had come from the farthest reaches of space with an unstoppable force, sweeping aside the human colonies like children's toys. They'd wiped out Earth's defenses and all but erased humanity from the galactic map. Those who survived were scattered, stranded in far-off worlds, too broken to mount any meaningful resistance. That was, until now. Valeria had been a child the last time she'd seen Earth, a hazy memory, an echo of a world that had once been. She'd grown up in the exile camps, training to be a soldier from the day she could walk. She had learned to fight, to lead, and most importantly, to survive. But survival alone wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to hide in the shadows while the Galacrians held the galaxy in an iron grip. No, humanity had to rise again. It was time to make a stand. Commander Klein, came a voice from behind her, breaking the silence. It was Captain Idris Malik, her second in command. His tone was steady, but she could hear the underlying anxiety. It was in his eyes, the way he held his posture. Even the most seasoned veterans couldn't fully prepare for what they were about to face. Yes, Captain. Valeria turned, her sharp eyes meeting his. We've crossed into the Galacrian home system, Malik reported, his voice laced with gravity. Our presence has been detected. Fleet interceptors are on the move. Valeria's jaw tightened, her hands clenched into fists. The time had come. The Ghost Fleet, the last remnants of humanity's military might, had been hidden in the outer reaches of the galaxy for generations, but now they were on the offensive. Her heart pounded in her chest, but there was no fear, only a sharp clarity of purpose. She knew what needed to be done. This wasn't a moment for hesitation or doubt. We're ready, Captain, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of 1,000 lives behind it. She turned back toward the viewport, watching the stars as the Ember's wrath sped forward, its engines roaring with the power of humanity's final gamble. Prepare the fleet for engagement. We make our stand here. Malik nodded and stepped away, already barking orders into his comms. The crew moved with practiced precision, the ship buzzing with the anticipation of battle. Valeria stood still, her mind racing through the strategy. They had been preparing for this moment for decades. The plan was risky even by human standards, but there was no other choice. The Ghost Fleet had no other purpose than to break the Galacrian stranglehold on the galaxy. If they failed, it would mean the extinction of humanity. Valeria had always believed in humanity's resilience. Even in the darkest of times, she had never doubted that the human spirit would endure. The Earth Wars had shown them at their worst, but they had also shown humanity's greatest strength, the ability to adapt, to overcome, to find hope where there was none. It was this spark, the ember of resistance, that Valeria now carried forward. As the Ember's wrath neared the Galacrian capital, she could feel the tension mounting in the air. The Ghost Fleet, composed of a handful of ships, was far outnumbered by the Galacrians. But the humans had one advantage the Galacrians didn't: ingenuity. The Galacrians, for all their might, were arrogant. They thought humanity weak. They thought the remnants of Earth's resistance were nothing more than scattered remnants, clinging to a lost cause. They were wrong. Commander, we're entering range of their sensors, came the voice of Ensign Sarah Tran, the ship's chief tactical officer. They've launched interceptor drones. They're closing in. Valeria didn't flinch. The Ember's wrath had been designed for situations like this. Built from the salvaged remains of ancient human technology, the ship was equipped with cloaking technology and high-powered weapons that could bypass the best defenses. This was humanity's trump card, their final weapon. But it wasn't enough to simply have powerful technology. The real strength lay in their ability to outthink the enemy. Launch Phase 1, Valeria ordered. Deploy the decoy drones. Initiate the cloaking field. The ship shuddered slightly as the drones were launched into space. They scattered in all directions, simulating a larger fleet. The Ember's Wrath activated its cloaking device, disappearing from the Galacrian sensors. All ships engage cloaking, Valeria transmitted to the rest of the Ghost Fleet, which consisted of only 4 other vessels. Move into position. The Galacrian interceptors were confused at first, scanning the vast emptiness of space, their sensors failing to detect the presence of the human ships. Valeria watched on the tactical display as the interceptors spread out in search of their invisible targets. The element of surprise was humanity's greatest weapon, and they were going to use it to its fullest. Time to light the first spark, Valeria muttered to herself, feeling the familiar rush of battle adrenaline surge through her. She had been in countless skirmishes, but this, the fight for humanity's future, was different. It was personal. She turned to her communications officer. Contact Phoenix. It's time. Phoenix, Valeria said, her voice calm but filled with resolve. You know what to do. The ship's AI, Phoenix, responded almost instantly. Acknowledged, Commander. Initiating system override now. The Ember's Wrath was the most advanced ship in the fleet, not just because of its weaponry, but because of Phoenix's advanced capabilities. Phoenix wasn't just an AI, it was a mind in its own right, crafted from the combined ingenuity of human and alien technology. It had been humanity's greatest achievement in their darkest hours. The AI's voice, a calm, almost soothing tone, filled the bridge. Target acquired. I'm bypassing the Galacrian firewall. I'll disrupt their main comms and power grids. You'll have a 2-minute window. Valeria nodded. Understood. Let's make it count. As Phoenix worked its digital magic, the Galacrian fleet began to experience strange anomalies. Their communication systems flickered and then went dark. Their engines sputtered, and weapons fired erratically. They were blind, vulnerable. But Valeria didn't need to see their fear. She knew it was there. She turned back to the viewport, watching as the Ghost Fleet moved into position, poised to strike. The Ember's Wrath and its allies might be outnumbered, but they were far from powerless. The first salvo of plasma torpedoes flew from the Ember's Wrath, striking the lead Galacrian cruiser. The explosion was enormous, sending shockwaves rippling through the black void. The Galacrians scrambled, their once feared fleet now a chaotic mess of malfunctioning ships. The human fleet, despite its numerical disadvantage, tore through the confusion with surgical precision. Keep the pressure on them, Valeria barked, her eyes gleaming with the fire of defiance. Don't give them a second to regroup. The battle had only just begun, but already the Galacrians were losing their grip on the situation. They had underestimated humanity. And now, the ember of resistance was igniting into a blazing fire. The Ember's Wrath cut through the darkness of space like a phantom, her sleek form nearly invisible against the backdrop of the distant stars. Valeria Klein stood in the command center, watching as the ship's AI, Phoenix, continued to hack into the Galacrian fleet systems. The air was thick with anticipation, tension rippling through the bridge as the crew worked silently, each individual playing their part in this desperate operation. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time, but there was no going back now. Humanity had not just fought the Galacrians for survival, they fought for their legacy. Earth's people had been scattered across the galaxy, driven into the fringes of known space after the Great Exodus. Some had found refuge on distant planets, while others had become lost in the dark corners of the galaxy. But the Ghost Fleet, a collection of the last remaining ships of humanity's military might, had returned to reclaim what was lost. Valeria ran a hand through her short, dark hair, her eyes steely with determination. The Ember's Wrath was one of 5 ships left in the Ghost Fleet. Unlike the massive, towering behemoths of the Galacrian war machines, the human ships were sleek, fast, and designed for surgical strikes. They were scavenged from ancient technology, some human, some alien, and all patched together with the ingenuity that had always been humanity's strongest weapon. These ships were the last remnants of a forgotten war, their crews descendants of Earth's exiled survivors. But their strength lay not in their firepower alone. It was in their unity, in their refusal to give up. "Commander," came the voice of Captain Idris Malik, her second in command, pulling Valeria from her thoughts. "We've intercepted their communications. The Galacrians are on the move. They deployed a fleet of interceptors to engage us. Looks like they're trying to draw us out of the shadows." Valeria nodded, the fire in her chest igniting. "They'll regret that mistake," she muttered. "Ready all systems. We'll take the fight to them." The Ghost Fleet had been preparing for this moment for years, hidden in the furthest reaches of space, away from Galacrian surveillance. Their mission was clear: to break the back of the Galacrian Empire and liberate the occupied worlds. They had the element of surprise, but it was a fragile advantage. If they were detected too soon, they would be overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the Galacrian forces. "Status report, Ensign Tran," Valeria called, turning toward the tactical officer. Ensign Sarah Tran was young, barely out of her teens, but she had been handpicked for her tactical brilliance. Her fingers danced over the holographic controls, pulling up the fleet's positions on the star map. "We're almost in range of their fleet, Commander. Our cloaking systems are holding up, but we won't have much time before they detect us." Valeria's mind raced, calculating their odds. The Galacrians were formidable, and despite all their technology, humanity had never had the resources to match them in a full-scale war. But now they had something the Galacrians couldn't anticipate: stealth, speed, and a burning desire to win. The Ghost Fleet would strike fast, hit hard, and fade into the shadows before the Galacrians even knew what hit them. "Captain Malik," Valeria said, her voice firm, "we need to move fast. We'll target their supply ships first, disrupt their logistics and communication, take out their satellites. If we can cripple their command structure, the rest of the fleet will be disoriented." "Understood," Malik replied, his voice steady. He knew what was at stake. Every moment counted, and he was ready to execute the plan to perfection. "Shifting course now." "Phoenix," Valeria called to the ship's AI. "Initiate Phase 2. We need full system override on their sensors. Distract them long enough for us to make our move." "Acknowledged," Phoenix replied, its voice calm and unwavering. "Initiating sensor disruption now." The Ember's Wrath shuddered briefly as Phoenix worked its magic. A ripple of energy spread through the surrounding space, and the Galacrian fleet's sensors went haywire. Communications scrambled, and their radar systems blinked out of existence, replaced by chaotic static. It was a perfect opportunity. "Now," Valeria barked, "engage warp drives and launch the attack." In a coordinated rush, the Ghost Fleet moved as one. The Ember's Wrath and its 4 accompanying ships cloaked once again, fading into the stars as the Galacrians struggled to make sense of the sudden malfunction in their systems. The first wave of plasma missiles rocketed through the void, tearing through the Galacrian supply ships. Explosions rang out as the human ships struck quickly and efficiently, disrupting the Galacrian supply lines before they could react. "Direct hit on the supply convoy, Commander," Ensign Tran reported, her voice laced with a mix of relief and adrenaline. "They've lost 2 transport ships. The rest are scattering." Valeria's lips curled into a grim smile. "Good. Keep the pressure on. We're not done yet." The Galacrians, still reeling from the sudden attack, scrambled to reassert control. Their warships turned to engage, but their movements were disjointed, confused. The human fleet was a blur, darting in and out of sight, launching precise strikes against the Galacrians' weak points. The longer they kept the Galacrians off balance, the better their chances of victory. For a brief moment, Valeria allowed herself a breath, watching the chaos unfold. It was a rare thing in this war, an actual victory. Humanity had been beaten, scattered to the far reaches of space, but now they were fighting back. This was the spark they had been waiting for. Commander, Malik's voice cut through the moment of triumph. The Galacrians are regrouping. They're launching a counterattack. Their fleet is shifting into formation. Valeria straightened, the momentary euphoria fading. The fight was far from over. Prepare for Phase 3, she ordered. Target their flagship. If we take out their command ship, the rest will crumble. The Ember's wrath and its fleet surged forward, moving with ruthless precision. The Galacrians, still trying to adjust to the disruptions in their systems, were disoriented. It was now or never. The human fleet locked onto their target, the Galacrian dreadnought, Inferno's Wrath, the largest and most advanced ship in their arsenal. It loomed in space like a giant, its hulking shape bristling with weapons. "We're close," Ensign Tran reported, her voice tight with focus. "The dreadnought shields are still up. Phoenix, can you get through their defenses?" Phoenix's voice came through crisp and confident. "I can initiate a direct feed to their shield generators. The ship's systems are still vulnerable to my interface. Stand by." Valeria's pulse quickened. This was it. If Phoenix could hack into the dreadnought's shields, they would have a chance to disable it. If not, they would have to retreat and regroup. It was a gamble, and the odds were against them, but they had no choice. "Do it," Valeria said. Phoenix did not hesitate. The ship's AI hacked into the Inferno's Wrath shield generators, sending waves of disruptive energy through the Galacrian ship's systems. The once impregnable shields flickered, and for a brief moment, the dreadnought was exposed. "Now," Valeria commanded, her voice like steel. "Fire everything we've got." The Ember's Wrath unleashed its full arsenal of missiles and plasma cannons. The sheer volume of firepower struck the Inferno's Wrath like a tidal wave, and the Galacrian ship shuddered under the assault. Sparks flew from its hull as its shields collapsed completely, leaving it vulnerable. The Galacrians fired back in a desperate counterattack, but it was too late. The human fleet, faster and more agile, avoided the worst of the fire and pressed the advantage. Targeting their engine core, Ensign Tran reported. "We've hit it. Critical damage." The Inferno's Wrath groaned under the assault, its systems collapsing one by one. The once proud flagship of the Galacrian fleet was on the verge of collapse. "Continue the attack." "No mercy," Valeria ordered, her voice unwavering. "Finish this." The Ember's Wrath and its fleet poured every last ounce of firepower into the dying ship. The Galacrians fought desperately, but they were already beaten. The Inferno's Wrath exploded in a massive ball of flame, its destruction signaling the beginning of the end for the Galacrian fleet. Valeria stood in the command center, watching the explosion. She allowed herself a rare moment of triumph, though she knew the battle was far from over. This was only the beginning. The ember of humanity's resistance had caught fire. The war had just turned in their favor. "Prepare for the next phase," she said quietly, her eyes hard as flint. "This is only the first victory. The Galacrians are not finished yet." The air inside the Ember's Wrath felt heavy, saturated with the aftermath of battle. The sharp tang of ionized metal lingered in the bridge, a reminder of the chaos outside. Yet, despite the physical tension in the air, there was an almost surreal stillness as the crew worked to recover from their first engagement with the Galacrians. For the first time in years, they had tasted victory. The destruction of the Inferno's Wrath, the pride of the Galacrian fleet, was a blow they had never expected to land. The enemy's flagging morale was already spreading like wildfire among their ranks, and Valeria Klein knew this was a moment they could not squander. The Ember's wrath slipped through the darkness of space like a shadow, its engines humming softly as it accelerated toward the next phase of their plan. The fleet had scattered to avoid detection in the aftermath of the battle, each ship cloaked and hidden in the vastness of the galaxy. They were not ready to show their hand fully, not yet. The Ember's wrath had delivered the first strike, but it was only the beginning of what Valeria had promised, humanity's last stand. Commander Klein, Captain Idris Malik's voice broke through the silence, a steady, familiar presence on the bridge. We've received a priority transmission from the Resistance Council. They've confirmed that the Galacrians are fortifying their homeworld. The next few days will be crucial. Valeria turned her gaze from the viewport and faced Malik. Her sharp, dark eyes were calculating, weighing every word and decision. Fortifying their homeworld? She asked, almost rhetorically. They know we're here. They're preparing for a final stand, Malik confirmed, stepping closer to her. His brow was furrowed, eyes tired from the intensity of the battle, but there was resolve there too. He was no stranger to warfare, but there was a certain gravity to this moment. The Council suggests we go on the offensive while we still have the advantage. If we wait, the Galacrians will only grow stronger. We need to hit them now, while they're vulnerable. Valeria nodded slowly. The plan had always been to strike at the heart of the Galacrian Empire, to undermine their leadership and cause a rift among their ranks. If they could cripple the Galacrians now, they might just stand a chance. The destruction of their flagship had already caused significant disruption in their command structure. The longer they could keep the Galacrians disoriented, the more it would shake their confidence. Ready the fleet, Valeria said, her voice cold and calm, belying the storm raging inside her. We'll move an undercloak and strike their defensive positions. Our target is their primary space station, the one coordinating their defenses. If we take that out, we'll buy ourselves some time. The plan was ambitious, an assault on the Galacrians' primary defensive hub, the Vortex Citadel, which orbited the Galacrian homeworld. It was heavily shielded and well guarded, but it also housed their communications and control systems. If the Vortex Citadel could be destroyed, the Galacrians would be left blind and crippled, unable to coordinate their forces. It would be a major blow to their war effort, and it was something Valeria knew they could achieve. But it would come at a cost. We'll need to get close, Captain Malik said, voicing the concern that had been gnawing at the back of Valeria's mind. The Vortex Citadel has heavy shielding, and their patrols are relentless. One slip-up, and we're toast. Valeria stared at the star chart, her mind whirring with calculations. The Ember's wrath was fast and maneuverable, but the Vortex Citadel was surrounded by a dense field of automated defense drones and capital ships. To breach it would require a precise, surgical strike, one that relied on stealth and speed. The Ember's wrath had the cloaking technology to get in close without being detected, but the real challenge would be breaking through the final defenses. We'll take a risk, Valeria finally said, her voice unwavering. We'll use the remaining drones as a distraction, just long enough to give us a window to breach their perimeter. Once we're in position, we'll launch the attack. No hesitation. No room for error. Malik looked at her, understanding the gravity of her words. Understood, Commander. I'll relay the orders to the fleet. With that, the bridge came alive with movement. Crew members sprang into action, preparing the ship for the upcoming mission. Valeria felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her shoulders, but she bore it without hesitation. She was the one who had made the decision to fight, to lead humanity's last stand, and there was no turning back now. Her people needed her, and they would follow her to the very edge of oblivion if it meant victory. Commander, inside Tran's voice cut through the quiet. The fleet is ready to move out. Cloaking systems online. We're set to depart. Valeria nodded, her eyes scanning the room. Let's make it count. As the Ember's wrath and the Ghost fleet moved toward the heart of the Galacrian Empire, the stars outside the viewport blurred into streaks of light. They were traveling at the edge of light speed, and even in the eerie quiet of the bridge, the energy of the crew was palpable. They knew the stakes. This was no longer just about survival, it was about revenge, about reclaiming everything they had lost. Earth, the cradle of humanity, was gone, but its legacy was not. Humanity would not die without a fight. The Vortex Citadel came into view, its massive structure dwarfing the ships that circled it in defensive formation. The station was surrounded by dozens of Galacrian warships, each one a towering nightmare of weapons and shields. The Citadel itself was a massive space station, its hull adorned with the cold, angular design that marked it as Galacrian. It pulsed with energy, its surface teeming with activity as Galacrian warships maneuvered around it. Valeria's eyes narrowed. The Vortex Citadel was the heart of the Galacrian defenses, and they were about to plunge a knife into it. "We're in position," Captain Malik said, his voice sharp. Initiating Phase 1. The Ghost Fleet moved into place, each ship aligning itself according to the plan. Valeria watched the tactical map closely, her eyes scanning for any signs of deviation. The fleet was in perfect formation, each ship cloaked and waiting for the signal to strike. "Phoenix," Valeria said, her voice low. "Override their communication channels. Initiate the disruption field." "Acknowledged," Phoenix responded, its calm voice filling the bridge. "Deploying disruption field now." The Galacrians, still unaware of their presence, continued to patrol the area, unaware that their doom was fast approaching. Valeria felt a cold thrill race through her veins. It was time. "Launch the drones," Valeria ordered. "Send them in at full speed. Distract their defensive ships. Buy us the time we need." A flurry of activity followed as the drones, small and maneuverable, shot forward into the heart of the Galacrian defense grid. They scattered, drawing the attention of the Galacrian patrols. The first explosion rang out as a drone collided with a Galacrian frigate, sending sparks flying through the vacuum of space. "Perfect," Valeria muttered under her breath, watching as the distraction unfolded. "Now, move in." The Ember's Wrath and the rest of the fleet surged forward, cutting through the chaos as they advanced on the Vortex Citadel. The Galacrians responded quickly, launching countermeasures, but it was too late. The Ghost Fleet had breached their defenses. "Target their reactors," Valeria commanded. "We take the heart of the station. Focus all firepower on the central core." The Ember's Wrath and its allies opened fire, their weapons lighting up the dark void as they pounded the Vortex Citadel's central reactor. The station shook under the barrage, its shields buckling under the onslaught. Valeria watched the damage unfold, feeling a surge of satisfaction at the sight of the Galacrians' pride beginning to crack. The Vortex Citadel began to collapse, its reactors sputtering as explosions rippled through its core. The Galacrians were scrambling now, their communication systems in disarray. The station, once a symbol of their dominance, was falling apart. "Prepare for extraction," Valeria ordered, her voice crisp with focus. "We're getting out of here before they can regroup." The Ghost Fleet was already on the move, retreating back into the safety of the stars as the Vortex Citadel detonated in a burst of fire and energy. The explosion illuminated the space around them, a brief but spectacular light in the endless darkness. "We've done it," Captain Malik said, his voice filled with awe. "Not yet," Valeria replied, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. "We've made a dent, but this war is far from over." As the Ember's Wrath and its fleet disappeared into the void, Valeria allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. Humanity's flame had been rekindled, but the war was just beginning. The stars outside the viewport of the Ember's Wrath seemed to stretch and warp as the ship sailed through the darkened expanse of space. Valeria Klein stood at the center of the bridge, her posture rigid and her gaze fixed on the vast nothingness. The Vortex Citadel was no more, its ruins now scattered across the cosmos like a forgotten memory. The victory had been decisive, but it came with a weight that would take time to fully understand. The initial celebrations among the crew had been brief but intense. For the first time in years, they had tasted what it felt like to win. Humanity, battered and broken, had dealt a blow to the Galacrian Empire, and it had shaken their foundation. The Galacrians had responded with fury, but their leadership was in disarray, their command structure crippled. The battle had been hard-fought, but the loss of their central control hub had thrown their war efforts into chaos. But even in the face of victory, Valeria could not shake the feeling of something missing. The price of that victory weighed heavily on her shoulders. "Commander," Captain Malik's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her from her reverie. "We detected a new Galacrian fleet formation. It's unlike anything we've seen before." Valeria turned slowly to face him. "What do you mean? Unlike anything we've seen before?" Malik's eyes were focused on the tactical map, his brow furrowing as he analyzed the data. "It's a massive fleet, bigger than anything we've encountered. It looks like they've consolidated their remaining forces in a last-ditch attempt to push us back." Valeria's heart skipped a beat. The Galacrians, despite the chaos they had endured, were not broken. They were adapting, regrouping, and preparing for the final strike. The Vortex Citadel had been only one piece of their intricate web, and with it gone, the Galacrians had lost their eyes and ears in the galaxy. But they had resources, and they were now preparing to unleash their full fury. "How much time do we have?" Valeria asked, her voice calm but with an underlying edge of urgency. "Approximately 20 hours, Malik replied, his eyes still locked on the data. "They're in the middle of coordinating their forces, but we've caught wind of their movements early. We might be able to launch another surprise attack, but it will be our last chance before they have everything in place. Can we get to them before they do to us?" Valeria's voice was laced with determination, though she knew how thin the line was between victory and catastrophe. This was no longer a matter of just fighting. This was about survival. If they did not act now, humanity might not get another chance. Malik hesitated for a moment before answering, his fingers tapping nervously against the console. "It will be risky. We're outnumbered, and their fleet is far more powerful than we're equipped to handle head-on. If we do this, we'll have to rely on speed and tactics, not brute force." Valeria exhaled, her mind already racing through countless strategies, calculating every angle. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The fate of humanity, what remained of it, rested on her shoulders. One wrong move, and the flame they had reignited would be snuffed out in an instant. "Prepare the fleet for battle," she said, her voice firm. "We'll strike at their weakest point, just like we did before. But this time, we don't pull any punches. We'll break their command structure for good. If we can take out their leadership, their fleet will be nothing but a collection of drifting ships. We hit them hard, and we hit them fast." Captain Malik nodded, already relaying her orders to the rest of the fleet. The Ember's Wrath's engines hummed with anticipation as they began to power up, preparing to launch into battle once more. Below deck, the mood was vastly different. In the crew quarters, there was an unease that lingered in the air. The victory over the Vortex Citadel had been exhilarating, but it was also a grim reminder of the price of war. The toll on the ship and the crew was visible. Their faces were drawn, their eyes hollow from lack of sleep, and the constant hum of tension hung like a storm cloud ready to break. Ensign Sophia Tran stood in the corner of the mess hall, eyes scanning over the data feeds that had been sent to her terminal. She had been part of the engineering team that had worked tirelessly to keep the Ember's Wrath operational, and even though the ship was one of the most advanced human vessels ever created, it was still showing the scars of battle. Repairs had been made, but the damage was far from trivial. Her thoughts were interrupted by Lieutenant Noah Anderson, who approached with a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked weary, his uniform slightly askew, but there was a certain calm in his demeanor that Sophia found both comforting and unnerving. "How are the engines holding up?" Anderson asked, taking a seat across from her. Sophia glanced up at him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We've patched up the breaches, but it's going to take a while to get the energy systems back to full capacity. We're pushing the limits of what the Ember can handle." "How much time before the next fight?" Anderson pressed, his voice softer now. Sophia didn't have an answer. She wanted to reassure him, to say that everything would be fine, but the truth was far more complicated. The Ember's wrath had been built for battle, but it had been stretched to its limits in the fight against the Galacrians. If the ship took too many more hits, there would be no way to repair it in time. "We'll make it through," she said, her voice tinged with a quiet resolve. "We have to." On the bridge, Valeria stood before the tactical display, her mind focused on the upcoming operation. The new Galacrian fleet formation loomed large on the map, their ships closing in fast. There was no turning back now. The Ember's wrath had to move quickly to neutralize the threat before the Galacrians could consolidate their forces. "We're in position," Captain Malik reported, his voice steady but tight with anticipation. "Initiate Phase 1, Valeria ordered, her voice sharp. "We're moving in." The fleet slid through the void, cloaked and silent, as they maneuvered closer to the heart of the Galacrian formation. The plan was risky, an assault on their flagship, the Red Tyrant, in the heart of their remaining command structure. If they could destroy the flagship, it would send a shockwave through the entire Galacrian fleet. But with every passing minute, the odds grew steeper. The Ember's wrath was positioned at the forefront of the assault, its advanced cloaking systems keeping them hidden until the moment of attack. The ships around them were a mix of human and alien vessels, an alliance forged out of necessity, one that had brought together disparate groups under a single banner: survival. Valeria's pulse quickened as the first Galacrian warships came into view, their jagged, dark forms cutting through the blackness. They were moments away from crossing the point of no return. "Fire," Valeria commanded. The Ember's wrath's weapon systems came to life, unleashing a barrage of energy bolts into the heart of the Galacrian formation. The explosions rang out in the silence of space, shattering the stillness. The Red Tyrant was in the center of the chaos, its massive hull illuminated by the fiery blasts. "Target their command center," Valeria ordered, her voice unwavering. "Take out the leadership, and the rest of their fleet will scatter." The battle raged on around them, but for Valeria, it was more than just a fight for survival. This was the culmination of everything they had worked for. Every sacrifice, every loss, had led to this moment. The ship shook violently as a blast from the Red Tyrant hit the Ember's wrath's shields. Valeria gritted her teeth, focusing on the task at hand. They couldn't afford to lose now. "All ships, fire at will," Captain Malik commanded. "Give them everything we've got." The next few minutes felt like hours as the battle unfolded before them. The Ember's wrath's weapons flared again, striking the Red Tyrant with deadly accuracy. Then, as if answering Valeria's unspoken will, the flagship's shields finally failed. The Red Tyrant was vulnerable. "Now's our chance," Valeria said, her eyes gleaming with cold determination. "Prepare for the final strike." As the crew of the Ember's wrath unleashed the last of their firepower, Valeria stood tall at the center of the bridge, watching as the Galacrian flagship erupted into a fireball of destruction. The victory was theirs, but deep down, Valeria knew the truth. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. The Ember's wrath drifted through the darkness of space, its engines silent after the brutal battle. The echoes of the last exchange of fire still reverberated in the minds of the crew. Their victory over the Galacrian flagship, the Red Tyrant, had been hard fought, but it was only the beginning of what would be an endless struggle to keep humanity from slipping back into the void of irrelevance. Valeria Klein paced the length of the bridge, her boots clicking on the smooth metal floor as the rest of the crew went about their work. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, and she understood why. The Ember's wrath had been a symbol of hope for the fractured remnants of humanity, but there was no denying the cost of their survival. "Commander," Captain Malik's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. He stood by the communications console, eyes narrowed as he examined the latest transmission. "We're receiving a distress signal from the remaining human colonies on Axion 4. It's not a standard call for help. The message is encrypted, but there's a clear sense of urgency. Valeria's heart skipped a beat. Axion 4 had been one of the first human colonies to establish a foothold outside the solar system. They had sent word about their progress in building defensive structures, but Valeria hadn't heard anything definitive since then. The Galacrians had always considered the colonies a secondary target, preferring to strike at the heart of humanity's fleet. But if they were now targeting Axion 4, this meant that humanity's last line of defense was unraveling. "Decrypt the message," Valeria said, her voice sharp, "and get me the coordinates. We're going to Axion 4. Below deck, in the command center of the Ember's Wrath, the crew was already preparing for another mission. There was no time to rest. Every minute they spent recovering from the previous battle was a minute the Galacrians could use to regroup. The Red Tyrant might have been destroyed, but its death had only delayed the inevitable. The Galacrians were too organized, too ruthless to be stopped by one blow. Sophia Tran, the ship's lead engineer, was working alongside her team in the engine room, her hands covered in grease as she ran diagnostic tests on the propulsion systems. The ship's hull had suffered damage during the fight, and the strain on the engines had been immense. As much as she wanted to collapse into her bunk and forget the horrors of war for even a few hours, she knew better than to allow herself that luxury. The Ember's Wrath was humanity's best hope for survival, and she had sworn an oath to see it through. Her terminal beeped, signaling an incoming transmission. Sophia wiped her hands on a rag before answering. "Engineering, Tran speaking," she said, her tone still professional, despite the exhaustion. "Sophia, we need you on the bridge." Captain Malik's voice crackled through the speaker. "We're heading to Axion 4. Prepare the ship for immediate departure." Sophia didn't hesitate. "Understood, Captain. I'll make sure everything is ready." Valeria stood in the center of the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, staring out at the swirling blackness that surrounded them. The ship was already en route to Axion 4, but the nagging feeling in her gut refused to subside. Axion 4 was supposed to be one of humanity's strongholds, a place where the remnants of Earth's people could rebuild and fortify their defenses. Yet the distress signal they had received was a harbinger of disaster. If the Galacrians had found them there, then nowhere was safe. "We'll arrive in a few hours," Captain Malik said as he entered the bridge. "We've been able to detect faint transmissions coming from Axion IV's surface. It's possible they've managed to stay hidden for this long, but we're not sure what state the colony is in." "I don't like it," Valeria muttered, her gaze fixed on the map of the sector. "This could be a trap. The Galacrians have always been methodical. They'll bait us with this distress signal, then hit us with everything they have when we land." "We don't have the luxury of waiting for confirmation," Malik replied. "We need to act now." Valeria hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Prepare the boarding teams. We'll make this a fast strike. Get in, find out what's going on, and get out before the Galacrians can react. We'll approach with stealth, but we won't wait for the smoke to clear. I want answers now." The journey to Axion 4 seemed to stretch on forever. Sophia had just finished making a final check of the ship's systems when the emergency lights on the Ember's Wrath flickered to life. She knew what that meant. Something had triggered a system warning. She rushed to the nearest terminal and quickly scanned the readings. The power surge came from the forward shields. Something had caused them to spike beyond safe limits. It was only for a brief moment, but the instability could have catastrophic effects if left unchecked. Sophia cursed under her breath as she tapped furiously on the console. It would take a few minutes to correct the problem, but if they didn't act quickly, the shields could fail entirely. With the Galacrians still lurking in the shadows, the last thing they needed was to be exposed to an incoming attack without protection. A warning flashed across her screen. "System failure. Forward shield grid. Power surge detected." "Sophia to the bridge," she said, panic creeping into her voice. "We have a problem with the shields. It's nothing critical, but we need to address it before we get too close to Axion 4. Valeria stood at the viewport of the bridge, her gaze distant as she watched the stars blur into streaks of light. They were close now, too close to the heart of the galaxy, and she could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on her. She had lost so many people already, friends, allies, comrades, and the only thing that kept her moving forward was the same driving force that had guided humanity through its darkest hours, the will to survive. Sophia reports a power surge in the forward shields, Captain Malik said as he walked onto the bridge. It's nothing immediate, but we may need to recalibrate before we get into range of Axion IV's atmosphere. Valeria nodded, her thoughts elsewhere. We're close, but we can't afford to stop, even for a second. Keep the ship moving, Captain. The colony needs us. The transmission signal from Axion 4 flickered again, and Valeria's heart skipped. This wasn't just a distress call, it was something more. We're getting a live feed now, Malik said, his voice taut. It's a visual transmission. It's coming from the colony's main control hub. Put it on the screen, Valeria ordered, her pulse quickening. The view screen flickered to life, showing the barren surface of Axion 4. But it wasn't the usual view of a thriving colony. Instead, it was a scene of destruction. Buildings lay in ruins, smoke billowing into the dark sky. The horizon was peppered with flashes of distant explosions. Amidst the chaos, figures could be seen moving in the shadows, their movements erratic, desperate. The transmission cleared, revealing the face of Colonel Jackson Ward, one of the colony's lead officers. His expression was grim, his uniform singed with burn marks. Commander Klein. Ward's voice crackled through the speakers, a sharp edge of fear in his tone. We're barely holding on. The Galacrians found us. They knew where we were all along. We thought we had more time, but they've already infiltrated the colony. We need immediate extraction. Now, Valeria's heart sank. Colonel, what happened? Why didn't you warn us sooner? We tried, Ward replied, his eyes hardening. But they jammed our communications. We've lost most of our fleet, and the colony is barely holding together. Get here as fast as you can. I don't know how much longer we can last. Valeria didn't waste another moment. Captain, prepare to drop out of slip space. We're going in. Understood, Malik replied, his fingers flying over the controls. All hands, brace for landing. We're going in hot. The Ember's wrath entered the atmosphere of Axion 4 with a violent jolt. The descent was turbulent, the ship's hull scraping against the resistance of the planet's atmosphere. Valeria's mind raced, her thoughts filled with a mix of strategy and instinct as they made their approach. The colony's defenses were weak, but the Galacrians had a brutal efficiency when it came to ending a fight. As the ship touched down, the final reality of what they faced set in. The war was far from over, and humanity had yet to pay the full price of its survival. The Ember's wrath shuddered violently as it descended into the atmosphere of Axion 4, the massive hull groaning under the strain. The ship's internal alarms screamed, and the crew braced themselves for impact. Valeria Klein's hands were steady on the controls of the command chair, but her heart raced. They were heading into unknown territory. The distress signal had been clear, but the situation was far more complex than a simple rescue operation. Sophia, status on the landing gear? Valeria's voice cut through the chaos of the bridge as she gripped the armrests. Landing gears locked in place. Sophia Tran's voice responded from below deck, the calmness in her tone a stark contrast to the violent turbulence outside. But we're going to need some stabilization when we hit the ground. The atmosphere is too dense. I've compensated for the entry angle, but there's no guarantee the ship will hold steady for long. Valeria didn't respond immediately. Instead, her eyes locked onto the view screen. Through the mist of smoke and ash, she could make out the shattered silhouette of the colony. The once thriving human settlement now looked like a graveyard, its towering buildings reduced to crumpled husks. Axion 4 had once been a beacon of humanity's resilience, but now it seemed as if the light had been snuffed out. They had arrived too late. Brace for impact. Captain Malik shouted from the navigation console, his face hard with determination. The ship lurched as it hit the surface, metal screeching against stone and dirt. For a moment, everything went still. Then, with a final grinding noise, the Ember's wrath came to a halt. "We're down," Malik said, his voice steady despite the tension. "Status on the crew? We've got minor injuries," Lieutenant Arya Patel, the medical officer, responded as she swiftly checked the crew's vitals from her station. "Nothing serious. We'll be fine." Valeria exhaled sharply. "Get your teams ready. We're going out there as soon as we can stabilize the ship." The atmosphere outside was a suffocating cloud of smoke and dust, making it difficult to see more than a few yards ahead. The bridge crew worked fast, using every available sensor to map out their surroundings. Outside the ship, the colony's defensive structures were barely recognizable, reduced to rubble. Axion IV survivors had clearly fought fiercely, but it was clear that they had been overwhelmed. "Commander, we're getting a faint signal from one of the colony's emergency beacons," Captain Malik reported, his eyes scanning the readouts. "It's coming from what looks like the central command hub. We should head there first." "Agreed," Valeria said, her voice cold with purpose. "Let's move out, but stay sharp. The Galacrians might still be here." The hatch to the ship opened with a loud hiss, and the crew stepped out into the wreckage. Valeria took a deep breath, trying to acclimate to the thick, acrid air that stung her lungs. The heat of the planet's surface felt oppressive, and the sound of distant explosions reverberated in the background. It was a battlefield, and they had just landed in the heart of it. "Stay in formation," Valeria ordered, drawing her sidearm and checking the magazine. "We move quickly, find the survivors, and get out. No heroics." The team moved out, advancing in a cautious, deliberate march. The sound of their boots crunching over the scorched earth seemed deafening in the silence that hung over the ruined city. Buildings, once towering structures of glass and steel, were now piles of twisted metal and charred concrete. Flames flickered in the distance, the remnants of human civilization burning away. "We need to keep moving," Malik said, his voice low as he surveyed the wreckage. "The longer we stay out here, the higher the risk of a counterattack." Valeria nodded. "Let's get to the command center, fast." They moved through the desolate streets, their steps echoing in the emptiness. Valeria couldn't help but think of the hundreds of lives that had once called Axion 4 home. Now, only silence greeted them. The survivors, if there were any, had been pushed into hiding or had already fled. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the silence, a crackling, followed by a burst of static. Valeria's heart skipped. It was a communication, though the signal was weak. "Hold up," Valeria whispered, holding up a hand to stop the team. She reached into her pack, pulling out a portable comm unit. The static crackled again, louder this time, but there was a voice in the background. "Colonel Ward." The voice said, distorted and ragged, but unmistakably human. "We're under fire. The Galacrians are too many. The last of us are in the command center, but there's no time. They'll be here any minute." "Damn it," Valeria muttered, her face darkening. "Malik, we've got to move now." The team broke into a sprint, moving through the wreckage with a renewed sense of urgency. As they approached the command center, they found the structure mostly intact, though heavily damaged. The entrance was barricaded, but the door was ajar, and there were signs of recent activity, scrapes on the ground, hastily abandoned tools, and a trail of blood leading into the building. "Stay alert," Valeria ordered. This could be a trap. With weapons raised, they entered the command center. Inside, the walls were lined with shattered screens and flickering consoles. The air was thick with dust and smoke. But there, sitting in the center of the room, was Colonel Ward, looking disheveled and covered in blood. He was holding a small data tablet, his eyes wide with panic. "Commander Klein," Ward croaked, his voice hoarse. "You made it." Valeria rushed to him, her eyes scanning his injuries. "What happened here, Ward?" "The entire colony's gone. Why didn't you contact us earlier?" "I tried," Ward said, shaking his head. "But the Galacrians, they've infiltrated every level of our defense. We thought we were safe in the command center, but they knew where we were. They've been hunting us down one by one." He grimaced as he tried to stand, but he collapsed back into his chair. "We lost half our forces trying to defend the main base. And now, there's no one left." Valeria's expression darkened. "What about the beacon? Why send us here?" Ward's eyes flickered to the tablet in his hands. "Because we discovered something. The Galacrians aren't just here to wipe us out. They're looking for something specific. And they've found it." Valeria's pulse quickened. "What are they after?" Ward hesitated, his face pale. "The Axion Key. It's an ancient artifact, a relic from the first days of human colonization. We thought it was a myth, just a piece of old tech. But it's real, and the Galacrians are determined to get their hands on it." Valeria frowned. "Where is it?" "It's hidden," Ward said, his voice almost a whisper. "In a bunker beneath the command center. But they're too close. They'll get to it before we do." Valeria's mind raced. The Axion Key. She had heard rumors of such a thing before. A weapon, a piece of forgotten technology from humanity's early space explorations. But if the Galacrians were after it, this was more than just a war of survival. It was a race to control a power that could shift the balance of the entire galaxy. "We're not leaving without it," Valeria said, her voice resolute. "Prepare to move out." Ward looked up at her, his expression one of desperation. "You don't understand. The Galacrians are everywhere. They'll find us." Valeria met his gaze with a steely look. "Then we make sure they don't." As the team prepared to head into the depths of the command center's bunker, the weight of their mission pressed down on them. This was no longer just a rescue operation. The fate of humanity might very well depend on what they found beneath the command center. And as they stepped into the shadows of the underground facility, they knew that the Galacrians would stop at nothing to seize control of the Axion Key. And if they succeeded, there would be no turning back. The air inside the command center's bunker was thick with a sense of foreboding. The underground facility, once a symbol of Axion IV's technological advancements, now felt like a tomb. The lights flickered above them, casting erratic shadows across the walls as Valeria Klein led her team through the narrow, sterile corridors. The faint hum of broken equipment and the distant sound of crumbling infrastructure only amplified the growing tension. "Stay sharp," Valeria commanded, her voice low but authoritative. "The Galacrians will be coming for us soon. We don't have time to waste." Colonel Ward, still weak from his earlier injuries, limped behind them, clutching the data tablet as though it were his last link to the world. His eyes darted nervously from side to side, every sound setting him on edge. Valeria had known him for years, and she could see the weariness in his eyes, the crushing weight of leadership in a lost cause. The weight of failure was something she was familiar with, but she wouldn't let it crush them now. "How much further to the bunker?" Valeria asked, glancing back at Ward. "Not far," Ward replied, his voice strained. "It's sealed, but I've got the access codes. The key should be inside. I just hope it's still there." Valeria's heart quickened at the mention of the Axion Key. If it was indeed hidden here, it could be the edge humanity needed to tip the balance of power back in their favor. Or, if it fell into Galacrian hands, it could spell the end for them all. She couldn't let that happen. Not after everything they had been through. They turned a corner and came to a heavy metal door at the end of the hallway. It was far more secure than the others, with reinforced locks and an advanced security system. The kind of door meant to keep secrets hidden, no matter the cost. "Here it is," Ward said, stepping forward with determination. He tapped a few commands into his tablet, and the door let out a mechanical groan before sliding open. Beyond it was a large, dimly lit chamber filled with rows of storage lockers, old data consoles, and sealed crates. In the center of the room, a large vault door stood, its metal surface unyielding and cold. Valeria stepped into the room first, scanning for any signs of intrusion. The place looked abandoned, untouched by the chaos that had consumed the rest of the colony. But she knew better than to assume it was completely safe. Secure the area, Valeria ordered, her voice cutting through the silence. Malik, cover the perimeter. Arya, check the medical supplies. Sophia, get the systems up and running. The team split up, moving swiftly to their assigned tasks. Sophia immediately set to work on the nearest terminal, trying to access the systems that controlled the vault's security. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Arya Patel began scanning the room for any sign of life or additional survivors, her weapon raised but her posture tense. Malik moved to the far end of the room, his eyes scanning the shadows. The place felt too quiet, unnaturally quiet. As he approached the vault door, he hesitated. Something was wrong. "Commander, there's something off about this," Malik said, his voice a low growl as he examined the door. "It's not just locked. It's been tampered with. There's a secondary security measure here." Valeria's instincts kicked in. "What kind of tampering?" "I'm not sure," Malik replied, running his fingers along the edge of the door. "But I think it's a fail-safe. If anyone tries to open it improperly, the whole facility will go into lockdown." "Then we don't waste any time," Valeria said, stepping forward. "Ward, what do you know about this fail-safe?" Ward's face twisted in pain as he looked at the door. I don't know much. The Axion key was supposed to be kept in here, but we weren't supposed to access it unless we had no other choice. If someone triggered the failsafe, well, the whole system might lock down permanently. The facility would become an airtight trap. A cold chill ran down Valeria's spine. The implications were clear. The Galacrians could be closing in on their position at any moment, and if they activated the failsafe, it would be a one-way ticket to a sealed tomb. They would be trapped in the bunker, cut off from the outside world. She couldn't let that happen. "Sophia," Valeria called out, turning to her engineer. "Can you bypass the failsafe?" Sophia looked up from her console, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I can try, but it's not going to be easy. These systems are old, and some of the access points have been damaged. I'll need a few minutes." "Then we don't have a few minutes," Valeria snapped. "We move now, or we risk everything." Ward stepped forward, his face a mask of determination. "I know a shortcut. It's risky, but it might work." Valeria raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, shortcut?" Ward's eyes shifted uneasily. "There's a secondary maintenance tunnel beneath the vault. It's not on any official map, but I had it installed years ago as a contingency. It's a direct line to the chamber where the Axion key is stored. If we can access it, we can bypass the main security grid and open the vault from the inside." Valeria didn't hesitate. "Lead the way." Ward nodded, though his exhaustion was evident. He moved toward a small door on the far side of the room and punched in a code. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a narrow stairwell that descended deep into the ground. The air grew colder as they made their way down, and the further they went, the darker the corridor became. "It's not far," Ward said, his voice echoing off the walls. "Once we're in the maintenance shaft, it's just a matter of getting to the key. We'll have to be quick, though. The Galacrians won't be far behind." Valeria's hand tightened around her weapon as they descended deeper into the bowels of the facility. The silence was suffocating, and every creak of the old infrastructure set her nerves on edge. She had faced impossible odds before, but this felt different. They were no longer just fighting to survive. They were fighting for something far greater, control of a weapon that could alter the course of the war. The bottom of the shaft was even colder than the rest of the bunker, and the air smelled of rust and decay. Ward led them through a narrow passage, and soon they arrived at a heavy metal door, much like the one above. But this one was unmarked and seemingly untouched by time. It looked out of place in the otherwise dilapidated facility. "This is it," Ward said, his voice barely a whisper. He punched a code into the terminal beside the door, and after a tense moment, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a large chamber, dimly lit by emergency lights. The walls were lined with strange machinery, and at the center of the room stood a pedestal, encased in a protective field. On the pedestal rested a small, cylindrical object gleaming with an otherworldly sheen. "The Axion Key," Valeria whispered, her voice reverberating in the stillness. She approached the pedestal, her mind racing. The object before her was small, perhaps no more than the size of a human skull, but its presence was overwhelming. It hummed with an energy she couldn't understand, a low frequency that seemed to vibrate in the marrow of her bones. Whatever this thing was, it was powerful, and it had the potential to turn the tide of the war. "Is it safe?" Malik asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. Ward nodded. "It's safe, for now. But we don't know exactly what it does. We only know that it's a powerful piece of technology, possibly even older than humanity itself. It was one of the first discoveries after we left Earth. We thought it was just a relic, but we were wrong." Valeria reached out, her fingers brushing against the surface of the Axion Key. As soon as she made contact, a shock of energy coursed through her body, sending a jolt of pain through her spine. She staggered back, gasping for breath. "What the hell was that?" Sophia exclaimed. "I'm not sure," Valeria gasped, her hands shaking. "But I think it's reacting to me." Before anyone could say anything further, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the maintenance tunnel. The Galacrians were close. "Too close. We have to go now," Valeria shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. The Axion Key had already shown its power. There was no way she was leaving without it. As they scrambled to retrieve the key, the unmistakable sound of Galacrian boots echoed closer, their deadly intent in every step. They were out of time. The sound of the Galacrians' approach was like a drumbeat in Valeria Klein's ears, growing louder with every passing second. The metallic clang of their boots against the cold concrete reverberated through the maintenance tunnel, sending a shiver down her spine. She turned her gaze back to the Axion Key, still resting on its pedestal, the hum of energy still vibrating in the air. They had to move, and they had to move fast. "Grab it," Valeria ordered, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Now, Malik was the first to react, moving forward to gently lift the key from its pedestal. As soon as his fingers made contact with the cold surface of the artifact, another surge of energy pulsed through the room, this time stronger, almost tangible. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the walls of the chamber seemed to pulse with a life of their own. "Easy," Malik muttered, his eyes wide as he carefully cradled the key in his hands. The strange energy seemed to seep into the air, swirling around them. Whatever this artifact was, it was alive with purpose. They had no idea what they were holding, only that it was far too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. "Let's move," Valeria commanded, her voice cutting through the tense silence. She could hear the Galacrians now, their voices muffled but unmistakable. They were closing in. They had no time to waste. Ward, who had been trailing behind them, took a deep breath and turned to face the team. "There's an exit just ahead," he said, his voice strained. "It leads to an old service tunnel. We can't go back the way we came. The Galacrians will have locked down the main entrances by now. But if we can get to the tunnel, we'll have a better shot at escaping." Valeria didn't hesitate. "Lead the way." Ward nodded grimly, and the team began to move quickly through the narrow maintenance corridor, their footsteps muffled by the low hum of the facility's failing systems. The path ahead seemed endless, winding through a labyrinth of decaying machinery and collapsed storage rooms. The air grew colder the further they went, and with each turn, Valeria could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They had the Axion Key, yes, but they were not the only ones who wanted it. The Galacrians, relentless in their pursuit of power, would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. If they did, the war would tilt irreversibly in their favor. Humanity would be nothing more than a footnote in the history of the galaxy. Ward's footsteps faltered for a moment, and Valeria's instincts kicked in. She whirled around, eyes narrowing as she saw the panic in his face. "Ward," she asked sharply, "what's wrong?" "It's too quiet," Ward muttered, his gaze darting to the shadows that clung to the edges of the corridor. "We should have reached the tunnel by now." I don't like this. Before Valeria could respond, a faint noise caught her attention, a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the walls. It wasn't the sound of Galacrian soldiers, but something far more primal, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Everyone, stay close, Valeria commanded. We're not alone. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled, a deep, resonant thrum that sent the team stumbling for balance. The walls seemed to shift, as though the entire facility was alive, responding to something far greater than just the presence of the team. The noise grew louder, a deafening roar that reverberated through the air. What the hell is that? Sophia's voice trembled as she grabbed onto the nearest piece of machinery for support. Move, Valeria shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Get to the tunnel now. Ward didn't hesitate. He grabbed the nearest access panel and wrenched it open, revealing a hidden passageway that led into the darkness. Without waiting for confirmation, Valeria motioned for the team to move. They poured into the service tunnel, but even as they moved, the rumbling intensified. The sound was so loud now that it felt as if the ground itself was shaking beneath their feet. As they sprinted through the narrow passage, Valeria's mind raced. The key was still in Malik's hands, but every step felt like they were racing against time. The Galacrians were getting closer. And whatever was making that noise, it was only a matter of time before it caught up with them. Ward led them through the labyrinthine tunnel, his face grim and his pace quickening. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, the walls lined with pipes and cables that had long since ceased to function. They passed several access points to other parts of the facility, but Ward didn't slow down. We're almost there, Ward said, his voice low but urgent. The exit is just ahead. Good, Valeria responded, her voice tinged with relief. We're not going to stop until we're clear. But as they rounded the final bend in the tunnel, Valeria's stomach dropped. At the end of the passage, the exit door was ajar, but it wasn't just the door that caused her heart to race. It was what lay beyond. Standing in the doorway, blocking their escape, was a creature unlike anything Valeria had ever seen before. It was large, massive, even, its body covered in thick, armored plating that gleamed dully in the low light of the tunnel. Its eyes were an unnatural shade of amber, glowing with an eerie, malevolent energy. The creature's maw opened, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth, and a low growl rumbled from its throat. It wasn't a Galacrian soldier, but something far worse. Something primal. Something born of the very bowels of this forsaken place. Get back, Valeria yelled, her weapon coming up in an instant. Move. The creature lunged with a speed that defied its massive size, its claws tearing through the air with a deafening screech. The team scattered, narrowly avoiding the creature's lethal strike. Valeria barely managed to dive out of the way in time, her breath catching in her throat as the creature's claws scraped against the floor, sending sparks flying. Shit. Malik cursed, his weapon raised. What the hell is that thing? Ward's face went pale. I don't know. We never encountered anything like this before. It must have been hiding in the lower levels of the facility. Valeria didn't waste any time. She opened fire, her shots hitting the creature's armored hide, but doing little to slow it down. The beast howled in fury, its amber eyes locked onto her with an unsettling focus. Fall back, Valeria shouted, retreating further down the tunnel. The creature didn't seem to care for the distance. It continued its pursuit, its massive claws scraping against the floor as it closed the gap. Where's the damn exit? Sophia shouted, her voice panicked. Ward glanced over his shoulder, his eyes wide with fear. We're almost there. Just keep moving. The team bolted down the tunnel, moving as fast as they could, but the creature was relentless. It seemed to be gaining on them with every step, its growls reverberating in the narrow passageway. Valeria's mind raced as she tried to come up with a plan. They couldn't outrun it. They couldn't fight it. Their only chance was to get to the exit and hope they could find a way to stop it. Finally, the team burst through the exit door, spilling out into the open. The tunnel behind them rumbled as the creature followed them into the chamber. Valeria spun around, her gun raised. but she knew it would do little good. They had no time to waste. Head for the ship, Valeria shouted, pointing toward the clearing in the distance. Go, go. The team took off at a sprint, their hearts pounding in their chests as they dashed toward the waiting Ember's wrath. Behind them, the creature's roars echoed through the facility, but it didn't follow them out. The tunnel had collapsed behind them, sealing the creature inside. For a moment, it felt as though they had escaped. But Valeria knew better than to believe in coincidences. The creature, the Axion key, it was all connected, and they had no idea what kind of power they had just unleashed. The Ember's wrath was only a few hundred meters away, but it felt as if it might as well have been on another planet. The team sprinted toward the ship, their feet pounding against the cold, uneven ground as the shrill roar of the creature echoed from the depths of the bunker behind them. Each of their breaths was labored, their adrenaline-fueled panic driving them forward as they pushed through the fear clawing at the edges of their minds. Valeria was at the front, her weapon still clutched tightly in her hand, but her mind was elsewhere, on the Axion key, which Malik still held in his grasp. Every step they took away from the bunker was a step closer to freedom, but every breath felt heavier, laden with the weight of the unknown. The key pulsed in Malik's hands with an almost sentient rhythm, as though it had its own heartbeat, its own will. Every so often, it would send a jolt of energy through the air, a hum of power that left the others uneasy. Valeria didn't dare look back to see if the creature was still pursuing them. She knew it wasn't far behind. If they didn't reach the ship and lift off soon, they would be doomed. The ship's docking bay came into view, a dimly lit structure nestled against the jagged terrain of Axion Ivy's barren surface. The Ember's wrath was a sleek, silver vessel, its lines sharp and angular, designed for speed and agility. It was their last hope, if it could even take off. Come on, come on, Valeria barked, urging her team forward. Her pulse was hammering in her throat, every instinct screaming for them to move faster. Malik's eyes were wide with a mix of fear and awe as he clutched the key tighter, his fingers almost white from the pressure. We've got to figure out what this thing is, Val, he said, his voice shaky. What if we're just walking into a trap? We'll figure that out later, Valeria shot back. Right now, our only priority is getting off this rock before it's too late. The ship was just within reach now. Sophia, already ahead, was working furiously at the ship's entrance, her fingers dancing over the console as she tried to bypass the locking mechanism. She was a prodigy with tech, and her speed was their saving grace in moments like this. Come on, Sophia, Arya urged, glancing nervously over her shoulder as the rumbling from the facility grew louder. We don't have much time. The distant sound of heavy footsteps reached Valeria's ears, and her heart skipped a beat. The creature, it seemed, had decided to follow them after all. The roar that ripped through the air now was not of frustration, but of unyielding rage. It was closing in fast. Sophia's fingers flew across the console, muttering to herself under her breath. Come on, come on, come on. Then, with a soft hiss, the door slid open. Get in, Valeria shouted, urging her team forward. They rushed inside the ship, their feet sliding against the smooth, metallic floor as they scrambled toward the cockpit. Valeria's heart pounded in her chest as she slammed the door shut behind them, the ship's interior lights flickering to life with a low hum. Malik, give me the key, Valeria ordered. Malik hesitated for a moment, but then he handed it over. The moment the Axion key left his hands, the room seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as though the ship itself was reacting to it. The hum intensified, and a shiver ran down Valeria's spine. What the hell is that? Sophia said, her eyes wide. It's alive. Valeria gripped the key firmly, feeling the pulse beneath her fingertips. She didn't understand it, but she knew one thing for sure. It was a force to be reckoned with. She turned to Ward, who had been quiet the entire time. His expression was pale, his eyes haunted. What's wrong? Valeria asked, noticing his distant gaze. Ward's face was set in grim lines, his voice barely a whisper. We don't know what we're dealing with. That creature, he paused, looking over at the others, it was never supposed to be on Axion 4. We thought the facility was abandoned, but it wasn't, Valeria finished for him. That thing was a guard, a protector. And now that we have the key, it's hunting us. Ward nodded slowly, his eyes flickering with a mix of fear and uncertainty. That key, it's tied to something older than anything we've encountered. It's not just a weapon, Valeria. It's a key to unlocking a power we don't fully understand. And if we unleash it, we'll all be dead, Arya interjected, her voice cold and sharp. What are we supposed to do with this damn thing? If the Galacrians catch up with us, we'll be sitting ducks. Valeria was about to respond when the ship lurched beneath them, sending the team stumbling as the engines roared to life. Sophia was already in the cockpit, working rapidly to get the ship off the ground. We're going to have to take off manually, Sophia called back. The automated systems are still offline. Hold on. With a final push, the Ember's Wrath shot into the air, breaking free from the gravity of Axion 4. Valeria watched as the landscape below them grew smaller, the jagged cliffs and barren wasteland fading into the distance. The stars were like pinpricks in the inky blackness of space, and for a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. We made it, Malik muttered, a sense of disbelief creeping into his voice. But what now? Valeria turned her gaze to the Axion key, still pulsing in her hand. It glowed brighter now, almost alive with energy. Her fingers tingled as she held it, and she could feel a strange connection to it, like it was calling to her, urging her to understand its purpose. We figure out what this is, Valeria said, her voice steady but determined. And we make sure the Galacrians never get their hands on it. Ward spoke up again, his tone heavy. You don't understand, Valeria? It's not just the Galacrians. There are others who are searching for the key. We were never the first to find it. Whoever built that facility on Axion 4, whoever created that creature, they were part of something much larger. The Axion key, it's a weapon, yes, but it's also a map to something even older than us, something that could change everything. Valeria turned her gaze back to the key. The glowing symbols etched into its surface seemed to shift, rearranging themselves into patterns she couldn't decipher. It was beautiful, terrifying, and beyond her comprehension. We'll need help, Valeria said, her voice firm. This is bigger than any one of us. We can't do this alone. Malik nodded, but his face was filled with doubt. Who can help us? The universe is fractured. The UN might be the only force capable of standing against the Galacrians. But even then, we're outgunned and outmatched. Valeria shook her head. We find allies. We make allies. And we do whatever it takes to unlock the key's secrets before anyone else does. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about the future of humanity. As she spoke, the key in her hand pulsed once again, its light brightening for a brief moment before dimming. It was as though the key itself was listening, responding to her words. And in that moment, Valeria knew one thing with absolute certainty. The true battle was only just beginning. The stars outside the viewport of the Ember's Wrath were silent witnesses to the chaos unfolding within the ship's walls. Valeria stood at the command center, the Axion key resting on the console in front of her. Its dim, pulsing light was the only source of illumination in the otherwise dark room. The key had gone quiet since they'd broken orbit, but the feeling of its power hung in the air like an electric charge, too strong to ignore. The crew had gathered in the lounge area, the grim atmosphere palpable. The sounds of the ship's engines hummed through the walls, the steady beat of life that now seemed distant and hollow against the weight of the knowledge they carried. We need to figure out what this thing is, Malik said, his voice low, but his words were thick with a sense of urgency. We've barely scraped the surface, Valeria. The Galacrians are going to come for us, hard. And there are others, too. Whoever is behind all this, they're not going to let us leave unscathed. Ward leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, his gaze distant. It's not just the Galacrians. They're only one piece of the puzzle. Whoever built that facility on Axion 4, whoever left the creature behind, they knew about the key. They understood its power. And if they were willing to guard it so fiercely, it's because they knew what it could unlock. Valeria's gaze shifted to the key. The cryptic symbols still shimmered on its surface, shifting ever so slightly, as though alive. It had been quiet for a few hours now, almost as if it were waiting for something, or perhaps someone. "I know," she replied, her voice steady but filled with a steely resolve. "That's why we can't sit idly by. The Galacrians want this key. They want whatever power it can give them. And if we don't figure out how to control it, we'll be nothing more than pawns in their game." Arya sat across from Malik, her expression hard but tired. "We're already pawns. The moment we took that thing, we signed our own death warrants. But I'm with you. We need to take control of this thing before anyone else does. The power it holds, it's too much for any one faction to wield." Valeria nodded, then turned back to the console, eyes narrowing at the flickering holographic projections the key was producing. It was as though it were trying to communicate with her, patterns shifting like fragments of a map or a blueprint, but just out of reach of her understanding. "Can you make any sense of it?" Sophia's voice was a soft whisper, a sense of caution in her words as she leaned in closer. "I don't know. It's like it's trying to tell me something, but the symbols, they don't match any known language," Valeria murmured, her fingers tracing the air around the holographic images. "There's an order to it. A sequence, maybe." Malik stepped closer, squinting at the data on the screen. "It's some kind of ancient technology, but it's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's not just data. There's energy woven into it. Almost like the key itself is alive." Ward's voice broke through the silence that followed. "It's not alive. Not in the traditional sense. What we're dealing with here is something far older. Something that was created to transcend death. It's more like a vessel, an artifact designed to carry a consciousness through time." Valeria's heart skipped a beat. "A consciousness?" Ward nodded grimly. "Think about it. Whoever created the Axion key, they didn't intend for it to be a weapon. They wanted it to be a conduit, a means of reaching beyond their time, beyond their death. The symbols, they're not just instructions. They're a map to something bigger." "To what?" Malik asked, his voice tinged with both dread and curiosity. "The architect," Ward said softly, the words hanging in the air like an unspoken threat. "The architect," Arya repeated, her brow furrowing in confusion. Ward's expression was somber. "The one who created all of this. Whoever they were, they built the key to unlock something greater, a power that could reshape the universe. The creature on Axion 4, it was a guardian, sure, but it was also a warning. If the key were ever found, the architect's legacy would awaken." A heavy silence fell over the group as the implications of Ward's words sank in. A legacy. A power that could reshape the universe. The kind of power that could change everything, for better or worse. "So what now?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes reflecting the same fear that gripped the rest of them. "We have the key. We're the only ones who do. And the Galacrians will be coming for us. They won't stop until they have it." "Exactly," Valeria said, her tone hardening. "We can't let them take it. We can't let anyone take it. But we also need to figure out what it can do. What it was meant to do." She looked up at her crew, the weight of leadership pressing down on her shoulders. "The only way we can survive this is if we understand it. If we unlock the secrets of the key before anyone else does. We need to find the architect. We need to find out where they are and what they left behind." Ward stepped forward, his eyes locked on Valeria's. "There's no easy way to do this. If the architect left a trail, it's probably hidden, buried. The Galacrians aren't the only ones hunting for the key. There are other factions, ruthless ones, who will do anything to get their hands on it. Then we make sure they never do," Valeria said, her voice sharp with resolve. "We'll find the architect's trail, wherever it leads us, and we'll be ready for whatever comes next." Arya leaned forward, her eyes meeting Valeria's. We'll need to be smarter than we've ever been before. This is bigger than anything we've faced. We can't afford to make mistakes." Valeria nodded. "We won't. We can't. The stakes are too high." For a moment, the room was filled with the weight of the decision. The Axion key had opened a door to something far beyond their comprehension, but they had no choice but to walk through it, to discover its purpose, to understand the power it held, and to make sure no one, no matter how powerful, could control it. The moment the decision was made, the tension seemed to ease, if only for a moment. They were united in their purpose, bound by the fear of what lay ahead and the necessity of finding the answers they needed. The future of humanity, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested in their hands. "We start by heading to the next sector," Valeria said, her voice clear and unwavering. "We'll search for any remnants of the architect, any hint of where they might have gone, or what they left behind. We won't stop until we find it." Ward turned, a grim smile playing at the corner of his lips. "I'll start analyzing the data we have on nearby systems. We can't afford to waste time." "Good," Valeria said, her eyes flicking back to the Axion key. Its light pulsed in time with her heartbeat, as if it recognized the purpose they had now set upon. "Let's move. The universe won't wait for us." With that, the crew of the Ember's Wrath set their course for the unknown, their path illuminated by the eerie glow of the key. As they prepared to face the unknown dangers that awaited them, Valeria couldn't help but feel that they were on the brink of something far greater than they could imagine. They were no longer just running from the Galacrians, no longer just fighting for survival. They were about to become the stewards of a power that could change the fate of the entire galaxy. And for better or worse, they would carry the weight of that responsibility with them every step of the way.